Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where the topic is Bounce Back with Lean Portfolio Management. My name is Doug Welsby, and I'm the Partner Channel Manager here at Wicrosoft. I'm also joined by my colleague, Richard Evans, our Managing Director of Advisory Services. During today's webinar, attendees will be on mute and the line will not be open for questions. However, feel free to use the GoToWebinar question feature to submit questions. I will address these during the webinar and will respond via email if we do not get to your specific question. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away from the webinar, no need to worry, as I'll be emailing a link to the presentation once it has been posted to our YouTube channel. I'll now turn the presentation over to Richard.
Excellent. Thanks, Doug. Hi, everybody. This is Richard Evans talking to you today from the great state of Washington State in the USA. Today, we are going to cover initially, why are we talking about lean portfolio management and how does that relate to where we are economically, globally right now? Why is this a relevant topic? I'll touch on, for those of you who are still learning about what lean portfolio management is, we'll touch on some of the benefits and case study data. And then I'll go through, I'll just handpick a few of the basic concepts behind lean portfolio management. Won't go into a ton of depth, but we'll try and bring up 10 or 11 key things. And then we'll end with looking at how to actually do something in this space. How do you get started and build up some momentum and actually create an action plan to do some things related to improving velocity of portfolio management and other topics. All right, now, before we get into all of that, I'll just clarify what is lean portfolio management. So lean portfolio management is one of the 7 competencies in SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework, and it's an interesting mix of methods, frameworks, tools, and things that have been built up over the years, including from lean as it was originally defined, I think, by the Toyota production system back in the day. So it's covering a number of frameworks that have been tried and tested. And as you can see from this picture, lean portfolio management there in the top right corner is only one part of how to rethink the entire enterprise, literally everything you do, including leadership and continuous improvement and so on. The lean portfolio management piece, that's really all about aligning strategy and execution of your work by applying systems thinking. Now, this picture, the dog face, this represents how I feel every time I switch on the TV nowadays and there's a commercial that says, "In these uncertain times," or "In these times of uncertainty." And it's driving me crazy. It's driving me crazy because those terms are being so overused. It's so repetitive. Now, of course, it's fair to say these are uncertain times, but how about this? If you want certainty, here's something that's fairly certain, which is every 10 or 15 years or so, we have some kind of event that drops the economy into a big dip, and then we spend the next while digging ourselves out and growing from it. These things happen with certainty. So, in recent history, we've had events triggered by, well, now it's a pandemic, of course, but we've had events triggered by systemic frailties in the financial lending trading system, terrorist attacks, you name it. So uncertainty is totally certain. It's going to happen. So it's all about how well you respond, how quickly you can move, and how well you can deal with all of that. Now, Gartner, let's look at the Gartner Framework. We work with Gartner the analytics and research firm, and I was talking with them the other day, and they showed me this, and I thought, well, this is kind of helpful. And if you want more information on this, there's a link there at the bottom. You can see to more information. But with this Gartner framework, and I won't go into all the niceties of this, but hopefully the picture tells a story, which is, yeah, we have these events. We've just had a big event, as we all know, and then there are these phases that follow, and sometimes we just think about the event, and then how do I get back to normalcy after this? The Gartner framework is suggesting to break that up and think about phases and plan for phases. So on this picture, we have business performance over time. And I think right now, most big organizations are probably in that phase 2 bucket. So they've sort of been through the react and respond phase, and they're now in the redirecting phase. And really all Gartner has said in this framework, which is more comprehensive than I'm doing it justice, is plan these phases. Don't think of it as just one thing, one reality. So I think with most firms now being in either phase 2 or phase 3, this is a good time to use lean portfolio management as part of your plan to get back as soon as possible and as healthy as possible. It's also, of course, a great strategy for how you can flatten this curve. So if you have lean portfolio management in place, your business performance for the next one is going to be that much better as you deal with this dip and climb again. Why lean portfolio management? Before I go into the basics of some key concepts, there's really 2, I'd say, compelling reasons to consider doing something with LPM, lean portfolio management, whether that's a brand new thing for you or whether you've already got some things going in this space, and there's always room for improvement. The first one is very simply, if your business goals or the words you're hearing from executive leadership are about, we need to move faster, we need to be more flexible and nimble, we need to, all of these kind of triggers and feelings say, well, lean portfolio management is designed exactly for that. So this is a great tool to consider if you're looking at some kind of strategic initiative that has that kind of flavor. The second thing is there are actually good case studies on people implementing scaled agile, and actually if you go to scaledagile.com, there's a number of them, and the stats are impressive, because if you the way business agility is defined is improvement to productivity, time to market, employee motivation, and quality. And you can see some of the numbers are very impressive there. By the way, time to market, I think, is a really important one in this context, because yeah, we're talking about speed and being able to move things through your organization, develop products, run projects, do all of these things faster. A great measure of time to market is how long it takes from the point of a perceived change in the marketplace or a perceived opportunity in the marketplace, how long it takes to go from perceiving that to actually executing something for your customers in response to that. So that to me is a good definition of time to market. And that's really what portfolio management is about. You see these threats, you see these business opportunities. How well do you perceive, analyze them, gear up, go out and execute on them? That's what it's really all about. All right, let's get into some concepts, some building blocks, if you like, of lean portfolio management. The one on the left there is possibly the most important, which is it's all about organizing everybody and everything around the flow of value. And part of that means shifting thinking from projects to products and services. So you'll find that a lot of the things we might do today that are project oriented, you start realizing there are some frailties in that way of thinking and acting, and that if you shift what you're doing with projects to more of a product-based organization and execution arrangement, you will do a much better job of being able to measure, see, and improve value for your customers. More of that later. Another piece is understanding value streams and how to do value stream mapping. I'll touch on that in a second. And ultimately, it's all about business outcomes rather than tasks. Now, on the right, there's a triangle here that represents the three big areas of LPM. One is strategy and investment funding. So that is how periodically we align the work in the enterprise and its portfolios of work, how we align that work to strategy and budget. The second piece is Agile portfolio operations, which is how well can you encourage, motivate, coach people to keep moving really efficiently with work and enable it, as well as monitor it and create visibility on it and so on. And then the third piece is lean governance, which is how you monitor, inspect what's going on in real time and are able to adjust, make adjustments, make decisions effectively as you go. And the people involved in what we call the lean portfolio management function, there are a number. We have, of course, often portfolio management offices, and within the framework of SAFE and LPM, there's a sort of updated definition of what an agile portfolio management office is. But there are other people involved in this function, including, of course, executives and business owners of product areas and other people too. Here's another key concept. That traditionally we have tend to organize people in our businesses into functional groups or silos, and as I'm sure you've all experienced, that can really inhibit value from the point of view of the customer at times, and can also slow down things. So part of the shift here is to organize those same teams into what I call a team of teams, which SAFE calls an agile release train or an ART, so that you still maintain this idea of small teams are the most functional, powerful unit, but you create this idea of a team of teams or an ART that is much more effective aligning all of those different teams to keep a focus on value and flow or speed. Now, one thing that's important to point out is some people interpret this as, well, are you saying we have to redo our whole organizational structure and HR things? No, it is quite okay to maintain your hierarchy. If you think about every organization pretty much has a hierarchy, who reports to whom and so on, which cost center so and so lives in, that's all fine to keep that. This is about recognizing that there's a hierarchy, but there's also a network being where people are actually working and delivering things. And so this is about rethinking the network of people working together. Value streams, I mentioned this earlier, and if you're not familiar with this term, value stream is again very customer centric and thinking, and it's all about defining the flow of value as it helps the customer and also helps the business in delivering that value. So a good example here is of a value stream is in financial services, the value stream called loans, where you've got this customer journey beginning with connecting up with the bank, however that's done through marketing, etc., and then engaging and getting some information, and eventually the value is I, as the customer, get the loan I need, the money I need, and the bank is happy because they get value from you paying off that loan. So that is an example of a value stream. Now, of course, there are not only process steps in that, there are IT systems, there are people in the front office, there are people in the back office, and so on. So SAFE and lean portfolio management is I would say mostly focused on the development value stream side of life, which is you've got operational value streams that are the very customer facing part, but then you have, of course, a lot of people who are somehow supporting those business processes, and also systems and technologies and other things, and those are your development value streams. And one thing that SAFE encourages us to do is to look at how we are organized today in terms of our business units and our big teams and our functional areas, and identify whether it would make sense to make some adjustments about what the value streams are in the organization, and not necessarily to change the HR structure, but to rethink the network of people and whether there's an opportunity to improve the customer experience and the flow of value by doing that. So value streams is a big deal, but not easy to do straight off the bat. All right, another key concept is annual planning versus rolling wave planning. So probably most enterprises are still doing annual planning. Many aren't. And most, I think, have recognized that that's not a great situation and are trying to step it up to something that's a bit more nimble. Lean portfolio management recommends that 6 monthly is a good place to aim for. So you can see in this diagram on the right, we've got budgeting happening every 6 months. A PI, by the way, is a program increment, and that's the best way to think about that is your quarters, your calendar quarters. Now you can also see in that picture that in addition to doing budgeting and planning every 2 quarters, every 6 months, there's also this quarterly planning thing that's going on. And that's super important, because if you think back to that example of the loans in banking I showed just now. In fact, this actually happened to me once. I was, a while ago, I was remortgaging my house, and the bank said, if you open up a checking account with us, we'll get you a better rate. And I said, great. So I went about setting up the checking account, and when I did that, it was like working with a whole different part of their organization. They knew nothing about me. They had none of my data. I even had to set up a separate online account for that. So overall, it was a terrible experience. And you could say, well, for me as a customer, and you could say, well, their value streams in that case were their loan department or mortgage department, and then their checking department. So yeah, maybe they're organized around value streams, perhaps. But what was missing was the integration between them. And so what SAFE encourages us to do is to put everybody, all these different value streams or divisions of value or lines of business, is to put us all onto the same cadence, so that every quarter all of us, no matter what we're doing, have this coinciding event. Usually it's a few days where we actually share information and do planning and integration between the different streams. So that is a really great thing to aspire to do, is to put everybody on that cadence so you can all connect and learn. And there's actually a structure around how best to do that, because obviously it takes some planning and some experience to be able to deal with that volume of people. But it's a great thing. Another thing here is dealing with money. So in the traditional model, we tend to do cost accounting often based on this idea of projects. And that can make life really hard, because we're trying to somehow fund lots of small units of work, and also, of course, trying to shift people around constantly onto different projects and move teams from here to there. If you move to a value stream model, then it can get a lot simpler, and again can enable velocity and flow, because you have much more stability around the team of teams working within a value stream, and you get these systems where people in that team of teams also can contribute to the question of what's most valuable and what's the right thing to move our teams onto next, as opposed to breaking the entire organization up into lots of little projects, which becomes this crazy Tetris challenge of trying to fit everything in together perfectly, and it never quite happens. Now that sounds all fine, doesn't it, in theory? But of course, you have to make sure that if you're shifting to a model like this, that you have guardrails to make sure there's still good accountability and efficiency and a focus on economics. So there are these guardrails in place in lean portfolio management, and here's one of them. One of the guardrails is guide investments by horizon, and this comes from, I think it's an old McKinsey framework actually, but the idea of horizon-based budgeting is one of the things you do early through the budgeting cycle is to specify percentages of the budget into horizons so that you don't go above that number. Now, looking left to right, think of this as a sort of funnel. Looks a bit like a jet engine, doesn't it? In this example, we've got Horizon 3 is your pure innovation stuff, and then as we shift towards the right, we've got Horizon 2, where we've actually starting to invest a bit more in some of those innovative ideas, and they're being incubated. And of course, you'll kill stuff off at these stages. And then Horizon 1 is where you have the majority of your investment, because this is the products or the projects, however you call it, that are actually delivering most value and generating most economic value or business value or customer value today. And part of Horizon 1 will be the stuff you invest in more heavily, and then there's this extracting segment, which is the products and the services that are your favorite ones because they are generating lots of value with little investment. And you can see in this example here, we've got what 65% of our budget allocated purely to Horizon 1, which is a good idea. And then we've got a small percentage allocated to Horizon 0, retiring, and those are your product, services, systems that are effectively debt that you're trying to get rid of. So these are things that you're still having to put money into to run, but you're trying to decommission them soon. Another guardrail to help with all of this is participatory budgeting, and this is a really great way to get more accurate budgets every 6 months, beginning annually, I suppose, when you start. So there's a whole slew of case studies on this. I'll try and touch on the key points. So if you think about a value stream, or today you might call that a line of business, I don't know, and you're trying to land a budget that inevitably is going to be the source of contention between different people, different functional areas that want to do this, where somebody else wants to spend the money on that. That's inevitably the case in an organization. And here's a good way to deal with it. So the first thing is everybody comes armed with things like strategic themes and ideas for epics. So that would be your list of big ideas that you want to execute on. Those are your epics. You would also, before you start, differentiate between run the business and grow the business budgets, so that we're clear about that, and that comes back to the horizon-based planning as well. And then the idea with participatory budgeting is making it a bit more inclusive than normal. So let's say in this example, we're looking at what, eight people wearing different colored shirts. Let's say those are 8 different teams or functional areas now sitting around a table. Now you would have that multiplied several times. So you would have not just your 8 units, your 8 teams, you would have perhaps dozens of people from those same teams. And the idea is you split all of those competing teams up into virtual tables or real tables, and you give them the budget numbers and all of those inputs, and ask each table, each group of people, and they're all mixed up at this point, to try and resolve the budget based on everybody's wish list and the available budget. And you end up with, let's say there are 6 or 7 tables or virtual tables of people doing this. Each table is going to come out with a different recommendation at the end, and everybody shares those in order to land on the final amount. Why this is good is because you develop this much better empathy between an understanding between all these different functional teams, and you get to a consensus on what the right thing to do is much faster and with less contention than when it's just a sort of closed door, just a few people arguing traditional situation. Another key concept is managing capacity. So if your organization is still very focused on the idea of projects, one thing inevitably that happens, no matter how well you chase information and chase people down, is it always seems to be the case that there's too much work coming through the teams, or rather, it's so hard to understand what is the right amount of work and capacity. And you can put a lot of effort into trying to measure capacity and availability. Of course, this gets easier with the value stream idea. One tool that's very helpful in this regard is just visualizing the work coming through the file, and then the Kanban boards that literally show you, from left to right, the amount of ideas coming into the system, being developed, being analyzed, and ultimately being pulled in to work on. This idea of limiting work in progress and how you set that up as a set of tools and a process is super important. Another key concept is just shifting from phase gate approval approaches to more of an agile or incremental development approach. What this means is that if you often govern your work in terms of, first of all, we do detailed requirements, and then we design something, and then we test it, and then we deploy it. If you do that, you're often deferring all of the risk of that endeavor until the end of the project, because there are so many unknowns. When you're doing more safe-oriented product development or service development, when you work in increments, you do all of that requirements, design, test, implement. You do it all within the space of a short cycle, and then you just repeat. So you remove a ton of the risk that usually hits projects at the end. Another part of lean is the business case. There is a thing called a lean business case. And the shift here is that a lot of today's business cases for ideas in the organization are often require these very detailed business cases. And what we found over the years is, although that looks reassuring and feels reassuring when someone creates a 10-page business case, mostly they're just not great, because it's often impossible to have all the unknowns properly covered in a business case like that. And also, things change, and so you might spend a lot of time doing that up front, only for the market to change. So part of lean thinking is you do these different kinds of business case. This is a template for this, and it's all about experiments and showing results early, and this idea of defining a minimum viable product up front for your idea. And then doing basically a series of experiments as you develop it, with incremental funding as you go. There's a lot more detail behind this idea, but it's very important. Mindset. Another part of lean portfolio management is a real focus on mindset. Mindset meaning the established set of attitudes held by somebody. And there's two big focus areas for a lean agile mindset. One is this thing on the left called the House of Lean, which interestingly, instead of having leadership at the top, it's got leadership at the bottom, which I like. Excuse me. Meaning that leadership is the foundation. And then you have these pillars of respect for people and culture, flow, innovation, relentless improvement, big focus on value, and by implementing an initiative around that, there's a number of things to bear in mind, such as how you coach leaders and ensure that every time you're making a decision or communicating anything, that it's got some bearing on this House of Lean model. And then the second part is on the right there. You can see the 10 principles of the Scaled Agile Framework. And the ones highlighted there are possibly most relevant to the lean portfolio side. So that's always taking an economic view of everything. Base your progress and milestones on objective evaluation, not just words like requirements are done. Visualizing and limiting work in progress. Small batch sizes are good. You can get, and part of the framework and the methods and tools are about how you deal better with understanding the sequencing of work, which is crucial to dealing with these problems of capacity in the organization. And from a mindset point of view, we're encouraging a more decentralized decision-making model, which only works if you've got leadership behind that, and it only works, of course, if you have those safety guardrails in place as well. And I touched on a couple of safety guardrails earlier. And this thinking extends even to how you do your contracting. Most enterprises have a supply chain that is most efficient by using partners and vendors, and they need to be brought into this way of thinking, this mindset, and this set of procedures as well. And there's again more information to be found on Agile contracting, but the key point is this: if you break down traditional contracts, you've got this scale from left to right on here on this slide, where on one side, on the left side, you've got risk mostly shifted to supplier because your contracts are fixed price, fixed date, and so on. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum completely open time and materials type of contracts, where the risk is mostly shifted to you, the enterprise, as the customer. And Agile contracting is trying to find and define these options that are somewhere in the middle, where the sort of you optimize the collaboration, you optimize for risk, you optimize for a win-win. Okay, so I covered there some key concepts behind lean portfolio management. I wanted to finish off with talking about how to actually do something about this, because it can look big or overwhelming or just very theoretical. So good place to start is identifying a few people who may want to be part of change. I'm calling these change agents. That should ideally include executives as well. And maybe these people are already the ones talking about, hey, we need to be able to be more nimble, be more innovative, move things through the organization quicker. We need to improve time to market. We need to reduce cost, whatever it is. And so identifying these people are important. And really, step one is about just getting educated and deciding whether you want to go this path or not. And at this point, you might want to create a roadmap that might look something like this, but it will be unique to you. Now, one of the things that we do at Microsoft is at this stage is to say, well, on one hand, we could train you in lean portfolio management and SAFe, so you can make this decision to commit or not, and that's the best way to do it, arguably. But the catch-22 is sometimes you have executives and others who might not even have the time to get educated or the will at this point, to sit through a couple of days of training. So what I do as well is do a sort of short version called Safe for Business Leaders, which is designed to just introduce the concepts at a high level, and then talk through the reality of how that might work in your specific organization, and then use that experience, which is a shorter experience, to decide whether you want to take the next step and really get into training and building a roadmap. Now, if you do decide to go forward at that point, then you have some kind of change initiative on your hands, and those kind of change initiatives should always have people, process, and tools focus all happening at the same time. So I think we've touched on the people side and roles and processes. I've given some illustrations of some of those. Of course, you also will need tools and technology to support this as well, because you're going to need visibility and data and other things. And although I'm not covering it today, actually, Microsoft, we have tools and technology. We have a one-plan technology platform that is actually runs in a safe and lean portfolio management mode to help you piece all this together. And then once we've got a change initiative and a roadmap sketched out, and we do some education and get trained, what we want to do is not just train people, but then we want to actually, after that education and training on SAFE, we want to have those same people, those same early adopters and change agents. We want to regroup with them and say, okay, what do we want to do with this training we've just experienced? The key is that this is a framework. Lean portfolio and SAFE, it's a framework, meaning it's not a religion that you have to follow exactly. It's a number of tools and things that you can borrow and use and adapt. There is no pure methodology here, and I like that, because that means you can decide what bits to carve off and eat and when, and what to leave to later. And so having those initial change agents that you've educated, having them after getting educated to then revisit this roadmap, update this roadmap, and decide how to adapt the framework, that's going to be key. And then as you move forward, these same people, these same early adopters, become a center of excellence for lean. And that's also critical, because you want to build in the sustainability of all of this as you go. That's it. I will leave it at that for today. We've covered where we are in the economy and why this might be a good time to think about lean and lean portfolio management. We looked at some of the basics, and we looked at building an action plan to get moving. And so with that, I'll say thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your week.